Hi, I'm Julia from Saddlefit for Life, and today I want to show you how I evaluate the fit of a saddle statically. Now, when we evaluate the fit of a saddle, we apply the 80-point Saddlefit evaluation. It's an evidence-based framework designed by Saddlefit for Life that makes the assessment process objective, comprehensive, and repeatable. It includes a medical history of the horse, their current workload and training intensity, an assessment of their posture and conformation, we take repeatable measurements, and more. The static assessment that I will show you today is only one component of an entire 80-point Saddlefit evaluation, so please keep that in mind as you're watching this video. But I still think that taking you through the static assessment step by step can help you understand the confusing topic of saddle fit a little bit better. So I brought a couple of different saddles with me today, and we will go through the process together and take a look at how they fit my horse Oakley. We will also be able to see how the fit issues we identify would affect his comfort and performance under saddle and might contribute to some common behavioral issues that are often associated with poor saddle fit. All right, let's get started. Okay, so before we can start with our static assessment, we first need to have a bit of an understanding of some of the anatomical landmarks that we're actually looking at on our horses. So ideally, in order to do this, you're going to want to grab some sidewalk chalk and you want to put your horse as square as possible on relatively level ground. So an indoor arena works great. You can do it in the cross ties, wherever you guys are comfortable. So we want to make sure our horse is squared up. Perfect. And then one of the first lines that I'm going to draw is of the widest part of his shoulder. We can probably all agree that we don't want our saddle to sit on the shoulder. Not only do we not want to be restricting our horse's range of motion through the shoulder, but the shoulder blade also has a cap of cartilage around it that we have to protect. Cartilage, like the cartilage in our noses or ears, has very limited blood supply, so it doesn't regenerate particularly well. So once that scapular cartilage or any cartilage is damaged, it will not regrow. So in order to keep our horses comfortable and sound and be able to ride them for as long as possible and of course keep them pain-free, we have to be very protective over that cartilage. So the furthest forward we can place our saddle is directly behind the shoulder blade here. But when the horse starts to move, that shoulder blade is going to rotate upward and back, and it will move towards the position of the saddle. I'm going to pick up his leg and I'm just going to show you. And you can see that shoulder blade rotate back as I pull his leg forward. So particularly important if you're jumping your horse as well, you have a really big range of motion of that shoulder blade and both of them come back at the same time. So we have to be very protective again over that scapular cartilage. So in order to make sure that we are not damaging our cartilage by the saddle, we have to make sure that the angle of your saddle tree matches the angle of the shoulder blade. So that way every time the horse steps, it can move underneath in a swift motion. So it can kind of go like this. If the angles don't match, then every time your horse steps, it's going to run into that gullet plate and it's going to do a couple of things. It'll displace your saddle. So you might have a saddle that starts to move backwards. You might have a saddle that twists on the horse's back, so it shifts in one or the other direction. And of course, we're going to start to chip away at that scapular cartilage. Next, we're going to look at our horse's sternum. So the sternum is this, or the end of the sternum is this flat spot here before the ribs split off. You can probably see it quite well from where you are. So we're looking for the highest point here. And when we follow that up, that usually lines up fairly well with the base of the horse's withers. If you've ever ridden bareback, this is the quietest place for you to sit. If we can align your sternum with your horse's, you're always going to be with the movement. If you're sitting all the way back here, you're going to always tip forward, subconsciously aligning yourself with your horse's center of gravity. This point is located in different places depending on your horse. Often, again, it's in relation to the length of the horse's withers. So you will find that this lands in different spots if you look at a number of different horses. So it'll be interesting to look at a few different horses if you have a few at your barn. Now, next we're going to go to the last thoracic rib. So I will actually palpate the point of the hip here, and I will feel forward until I feel his last thoracic rib here, and then I move up and down. So I move all the way up until I feel the edge of his spine there. It's a pretty crooked line. There we go. So this is the location of his last thoracic rib. Beyond that rib is the lumbar spine. That's a non-weight-bearing area. The ribs of the lumbar spine, they're short, they stick up kind of like airplanes. I'm going to put an image in the video here to show you this a little bit more clearly on a skeletal horse. So this is a non-weight bearing area. Pressure in this area is often associated with an inability to really engage the hind end. So those horses will have a really hard time stepping underneath themselves. They are typically not tracking up at walk, trot, or able to really pick up the canter properly with the hind end. Any form of collection work is going to be really difficult if you have a saddle that is too long. And of course, having pressure back here is also going to cause the horse to hollow away from that pressure. And we always want our horses to move around with an engaged core and a lifted back to make sure that we are, of course, protecting our horse's back health over time. So length is a very important factor. Next, I'm going to feel for the longissimus dorsi. The longissimus dorsi is the longest back muscle, and it's the reason we can actually ride horses at all. So we're very grateful for this muscle that we can strengthen and condition with good riding and good groundwork, and allows for our horses to carry us safely on their backs. So I will feel for that longissimus muscle, and I will feel until I feel the edge of the spinal column here, where I make myself another line. Now, we of course want to stay off of the spine itself, but we also want to stay off of the spinal nerves. We want to stay off of the dorsal ligament system that runs across the back here, and we want to stay off of things like the multifidus muscle, which aids in spinal stabilization. So all important structures that we don't want to crush with our saddle, okay? So you'll notice when you run your fingers up and you kind of feel that medium to hard edge, that this is actually wider than most people think. So we want to make sure that we do another horizontal line there, just to give us a nice edge and an idea of how wide that spine needs to be. So this area becomes your gullet channel. Again, it's very important that we have sufficient clearance all the way from front to back, so we're not crushing any of these structures, and we're allowing our horse to actually elevate the back and engage the core. Next, I'm going to feel that longissimus muscle again, and I will run my fingers down. This is where I feel the top of this rib head, where the muscles start to thin off. I want to stay up on the thick part of the muscle, on the belly of the muscle, so that gives myself another, that gives me another nice little edge there. Okay, and then finally, we have to talk about wither clearance. So most people know that we need clearance on top of the withers, but we also need clearance on both sides. We have another important non-weight bearing muscle, that's the trapezius muscle, that runs sort of like this. And the trapezius muscle is divided into two sections. It's across a little bit more, but that's okay, you get the idea. The trapezius is divided into two sections. So we have the cervical portion of the trapezius, and we have the thoracic portion of the trapezius. And the trapezius muscle is responsible for the range of motion of your horse's shoulder blade. So for protraction, so forward movement, and retraction, backwards movement. If you have a saddle that is biting your horse in this area, and you're placing pressure on that non-weight bearing trapezius, that range of motion of the shoulder blade is going to get interrupted, okay? It'll be really difficult for your horse to move forward in a sound and comfortable way. So again, we need to make sure that we have clearance on top of the withers, but we also need clearance on both sides to make sure that we're not placing pressure on that trapezius muscle. So when you're looking at the sides of the withers, you need about 4 inches or 10 centimeters from the side, on the sides of the horse's withers here. And this is a red zone. This is a non-weight bearing area. And this is often associated with fit issues that we see in the field, okay? So ultimately, what we're left with, and where we do want our saddle to sit, is in this rectangle here. This is our horse's saddle support area. So it's the area where they can tolerate the most pressure, where they can carry our weight as the rider, and where we want our saddle to distribute our weight. So now that we know where our saddle support area is located, we can now take a look at our saddles and check the fit of our saddle statically. Okay, so we have our first saddle here. Again, you want to make sure that your horse is standing nice and square for this exercise. And then we will put the saddle on his back. And the very first thing that I always like to check is my placement. So I have to make sure my saddle is actually in the right position. So a rule of thumb, a good idea to check this, is to make sure that the D-ring right here is right behind the horse's shoulder blade. Especially on jumping saddles that have more forward flaps, it can sometimes be difficult to make sure you're in the right spot, but if you make sure that the D-ring is right behind the shoulder blade, you're in a good spot. Okay, so first we want to look at the saddle length. So because we've actually identified where the last thoracic rib is located, it's pretty easy to see that the length of the saddle is okay. So this saddle is in good length. Next, we want to look at the balance of the saddle. Now, in order to understand the balance, we need to first have an understanding of where the normal balance point of the saddle is. So if I take it off of him again, and we kind of hold it up and we put it level, we can see that the saddle has a center balance seat, okay? So the idea is that that part of the seat that is perpendicular to the ground intentionally, where you're going to be sitting as the rider, is also not perpendicular, parallel, is also parallel to the ground when it's on the horse's back. Okay, so let's take another look. Again, making sure that our placement is correct. So from where you're standing, you can probably see that the saddle is sitting more like this. Okay, so right now, instead of the balance being flat here, or the seat being flat here, it's actually flat back here. So if a rider were to sit in the saddle, they're going to be put all the way in the back seat. Okay, so ideally, you would want the balance to sit more like this. So next, we want to take a look at our billet alignment. So billet alignment is a very important one that often contributes to saddle slipping. Can also be a big reason you end up with girth galls. When you have billets that are not in the right position, you get a lot of movement. So making sure that your billets are in correct alignment on both sides of your horse is going to be really important. Now in this case, the billets are pointing to his girthing area. So you can see that they're actually pointing right to that narrow part of his barrel where the girth is going to naturally gravitate towards. If you think about tying a string around an hourglass, no matter where you tighten that string, it's always going to migrate to the narrowest part. It's the same on the horse as well. Now he has quite the big barrel. We're in the process of losing a little bit of weight, but yeah, so this part here is pretty defined on him. He has a normal girthing area, but you can see it clearly fairly far forward here. And these billets are pointing to that girthing area, so the billet alignment in this saddle is okay. Now, we need to take a look at panel contact. So we're looking at the weight-bearing surface and how that is making contact with the saddle support area. Essentially, I'm lifting the flap here a little bit, putting my hand under the panel, right under the stirrup bar. This is where my fingertips are now. Stabilizing with my left hand, and then slowly gliding my hands backwards and feeling for that contact. So I will do that 2 or 3 times to make sure that I get a good feel. All right. And then again, you want to repeat that on both sides. So in this particular saddle, I'm feeling some hollowness right under the stirrup bar, and then there's also some hollowness kind of throughout the panel. It almost feels like this saddle may have some saddle rack damage. Essentially, when you have saddle rack damage, you have these long ridges in your panels. It happens very frequently when saddles are stored on metal racks. So this saddle has, again, some hollowness here, some ridges, so uneven pressure distribution, okay? So ideally, our panel distributes our weight as the rider over a surface area that the horses where they can take the pressure, which is within the saddle support area. And we want to maximize that weight-bearing surface, because the bigger the weight-bearing surface, the lower the pressure per square inch. So when we have an uneven panel, or we have a panel like this one, where you can see it's actually a quite narrow panel, we're not maximizing that space. So ideally we have something a little bit flatter and wider for a horse like this that has this amount of back space, to be able to maximize that weight-bearing surface and reduce the pressure on his back. Now, next I'm going to look for the wither clearance. So we already took a little peek earlier, so we checked the wither clearance on top, and I had 3 fingers. Now, on a saddle like this, I'm looking for about 2 to 3 fingers without weight in the saddle. To me, this is a little bit, I have like 3+ fingers, so it's a little bit too high, like we concluded earlier. So I have 3+ fingers on top. And then when I slide, so essentially I'm going in like this, and then I'm going down on both sides around the withers. As a reminder, we want to clear this wither cup, this non-weight-bearing thoracic trapezius. So I can feel when I go down on the side, I am making contact way up high in that wither cup, okay? So this saddle is too narrow. So the narrowness is causing it to hinge the sides of the withers, the thoracic trapezius, and it's also causing the saddle to sit up really high. Finally, I'm going to take a look at the shoulder angle in relation to the tree angle. So here we want to look, kind of put your left ear against your horse's neck, and then if you've done the chalk mapping, you can see the line here, and you want to make sure that that line is parallel to the tree of the saddle at the front. I'll show you this from another perspective so you can see what I'm seeing here. But this saddle is too narrow at the top, so the angle is too flat. It's sitting like this. It needs to be more upright, okay? So this horse so currently the saddle is sitting like this. The saddle needs to be wider for him with a more upright angle. This is the difference between tree width and tree angle. When we're looking at the saddle from the front, this is tree width, where he requires a wider width, and this is tree angle. So he requires a wider width and a more upright angle. Often standardized sizing only changes the angle. It doesn't actually change the width. So in this particular case, the saddle is sitting like this, and if I were to go with something like this, I would be creating more problems. I would accommodate his shoulder a little bit better here, but I would pinch the withers even more, which is a great example of why, standardized sizing of narrow, medium, and wide doesn't necessarily work for all horses, because oftentimes they need a difference between width and angle. I hope that makes sense. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to check for the straightness of the saddle. So I want to make sure that my saddle is staying nice and straight statically. Again, the static assessment is only one component of the entire 80-point saddle fit evaluation. You always have to verify everything in movement, and you of course have to take the rider into consideration as well. But just statically, we can get a pretty good idea of how the saddle is fitting. So in order to check the straightness, ideally you get yourself a step stool, and then you stand directly behind your horse, and you want to make sure that there's a straight line from the center of the cantle to the center of the pommel. And then if you have any rotating, which would be if the entire saddle goes one direction, or you have any twisting, which is if the saddle is twisted this way or this way, with the pommel going one way and the cantle going another direction, then you know you have a problem. Now the very last thing we're going to do is we're actually going to check off the horse is the spinal clearance. So if we remember, we want to have room, of course, for the spinal column itself, but we need room on both sides, a little bit of extra space for the additional structures of that vertebral column. Now, if we flip that saddle over, yes, you can see how narrow the gullet channel on this saddle is. So I have not even 2 fingers through the center here, okay? So for a horse like him, who requires a hand width from front to back, I can't even get my hand in the front. So this is going to cause significant discomfort on a horse like this. In fact, this does not fit most horses. It's a very dated way of building saddles. So yeah, a very interesting example, to say the least. So to conclude, we're just going to summarize everything again very quickly. We're going to rapid fire it here. Length was okay. Balance was too high front, too low back. Billet alignment was okay. We had, the panel contact was not okay. We had ridges that we will look at off of the horse again. We had hollowness under the stirrup bar, so that would need to be addressed. The tree angle was too flat for him. He needed a more upright angle. The tree width was too narrow. The straightness was okay, and the spinal clearance was too narrow. So all in all, not a good fit for this horse. This is not his saddle, don't worry. Now the challenge is some of these things we can address, right? It's a wolf-locked panel, so we could flock it to change the flocking in here to give him a better weight-bearing surface, but that's not going to take care of the tree width and angle. That's not going to take care of the fact that the spinal clearance is much too narrow for him, and it will not address the balance of the saddle. So sometimes making adjustments can be more fun than good.
All right, I've moved you a little bit closer so you can see really well. So we'll take a look at the second saddle here. Before we look at the fit of the saddle on Oakley, I first want to take a look at the seat balance here so we don't have to take it off of him again when we get to that point. So looking at it from where you are, I hope that I'm holding it semi well, but this seat has a center seat balance just like the other one, okay? So we want the flat spot to be about here when we put the saddle on his back, okay? So placing it back on his back, again, making sure that our D-ring is directly behind the shoulder blade. First thing we want to look at is the length. So lengthwise, we can still see, because we have our chalk mark here, that the saddle is sitting ahead of his last thoracic rib. So this saddle is still in good length. Now, next we want to look at the balance. So once again, the balance is too low in back, which I again suspect is coming from the front. This horse has deceivingly broad withers, so I am suspecting that we have a tree issue here, but we'll get to that point a little bit later on. But you can see that the seat is once again sitting, tilting kind of down in the back. It's sitting kind of like this. I'm amplifying it for you, where in reality I would prefer for it to sit more like that. Do you see the difference? This is how it's sitting. This is where I want it, okay? So balance is too high in front, too low in back. Looking at our billet alignment. So once again, we want those billets to be pointing to the girthing area. Doesn't seem to be a problem with this one either, so that's wonderful. We have the billets pointing to the girthing area here. Next, I'm gonna check for my panel contact. So I will stabilize the saddle with my left hand. I will slide my right hand under the stirrup bar and then run my fingers back to feel the contact of the panels. So this is a relatively new saddle. So it has recently been flocked. It came just, freshly flocked from the manufacturer. So we don't have any flocking issues with this saddle yet. It is very normal wear and tear in your saddle to have uneven flocking over time, which is one of the reasons I'm a big advocate for wool flocked panels, because we can actually adjust the flocking over time and we can fill in those holes or fix any saddle rack damage, or take care of those natural kind of areas of low flocking, less flocking over time, where the flocking material just kind of migrates away from pressure. So common spots for that are, like we saw with the last saddle, under the stirrup bar, so where the rider's leg is and where the stirrup leathers place a lot of pressure on the saddle tree, and then also under your seat bones. So you can actually, if you've been riding in your saddle for a long time, it's really fun to see if either your saddle is staying straight or you're sitting straight by feeling for your seat bones. So you can often feel the indent from your seat bones actually kind of under the rear of the saddle here. A little detour for you. Okay, so but in this case, the panel contact is good. Of course, I would normally check both sides, but for the purpose of this video, I will stay on the left-hand side here. Next, we want to check for straightness. So if it's safe to do so, grab yourself a little step stool, stand on a step stool right behind your horse, and make sure that you have a straight line from the cantle, the center of the cantle, to the center of the pommel. If pommel and cantle look like they're tilted this way or the other way, or if you have a cantle pointing in one direction and a pommel pointing in the other direction, you have a lateral stability problem, okay? So that means that you have either a saddle that is rotating or a saddle that is twisting, which always indicates a fit problem. And that will, if you already see it statically, it will only get amplified once you actually start moving. So something to really take seriously. Now, next we want to look at our wither clearance. So again, I will use my right hand to stabilize my pommel, and then I will slide my left hand in upright like this with my fingers kind of stacked on top of one another. On this one, I actually have 4 fingers of clearance on top. Like I suspected, the saddle is going to be too narrow for this horse in the tree. So we have 4 fingers on top, and then when I get to the side, it's already making contact up high. So unfortunately, I was hoping to give you a different presentation with a different saddle, but similar problem to the previous one. We're making contact in that wither cup, in that triangle that we do not want to have any contact in, where that non-weight-bearing thoracic trapezius is located. So this saddle would be biting him and would preventing that range of motion of his shoulder blade. So this is not a good fit for the wither clearance, which in this particular case responds to the width of the tree, okay? So next I want to look at the tree angle, the angle of the shoulder blade in relation to the angle of the saddle tree. And this is an interesting example because the angle is actually good. So I'll show you that from a different perspective. But this is, again, a great example where the angle is now correct for him, but the width is too narrow. So what can I do? If I had this saddle happens to be fully adjustable, so I can put it in a press and I can actually change the width and keep the angle the same. But if I had an interchangeable gullet plate system in the saddle, or any other standardized sizing that only ever changes the angle, I wouldn't be able to fit it to this horse. So thankfully, I can make those changes. If I wanted to use the saddle on him, I would be able to do that. But yeah, it'll be great for you to see what a good tree angle actually looks like. Okay, so finally, we need to look at spinal clearance. So remember, I made those X's a little darker for you to see. So we need to stay off of the spinal nerves. We need to stay off of the spine itself. We also need some extra room for the multifidus muscle, for the dorsal ligament system, for the structures of the spinal column that we don't want to crush with our saddle, okay? That becomes your gullet channel. So on this particular saddle, we have a very wide gullet channel. You can see that I have a full hand width all the way from front to back. So the spinal clearance on the saddle is excellent. Now, to summarize, rapid fire what we found. So length was okay, balance was too low in back, too high in front. The reason for that is that our saddle tree is too narrow. So that is causing the saddle to sit up high in front. If I widen that tree, the saddle is going to sit down more like this. The billet alignment was okay, the panel contact was okay, straightness was okay. We had too much clearance on top of the withers, not enough clearance on the sides, so the saddle is too narrow in the tree width. The angle was okay as well. So the only real problem with the saddle is the tree width, which again, because this is a fully adjustable saddle, I'm able to adjust. So this is a saddle that would be suitable for this horse with some adjustments. So a really great example for you to see.
I hope you enjoyed the video today. Make sure to hit that like button, leave your questions or video requests in the comments, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next video. I look forward to seeing you there. Happy riding.